The Miami Marlins are making some changes. They're having their coaches now calling pitches from the dugout at the Major League Baseball level instead of the catchers calling the pitches. We are going to dive into that and some of the impact that they are already seeing from that. I'm going to bring in Lance Brozdowski, who is the Player Development Analyst with Marquee Sports Network, has a big following on YouTube as well. And Lance, we appreciate you joining us this afternoon here on Florida Live.
Thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, let's talk some ball.
Yeah, let's. But before we dive into what's going on with the Marlins and the impact they're seeing from that, I want to get your thoughts on the kind of the breaking news this afternoon. Major League Baseball approving the automated balls and strikes challenge system that we have seen in spring training, seen it in some of the minor leagues, but sounds like it's coming to Major League Baseball next year. What do you think about it?
Yeah, universally, this is a fantastic move. I'm pretty happy that it's happening for next year and they're not delaying yet another season. They tried this out in spring training. I think it was universally loved. I think fans will love it. It's very, very quick. If you've ever watched a minor league game where this was implemented, it happens almost instantaneously. And we kind of figured this maybe was on the table for this coming season, particularly because we saw at the beginning of the year, the league adjusted how umpires were graded in terms of how much buffer they got. So they started to kind of shrink the zone because for the most part, historically, the zone's been called a little bigger than that box you see on screen. The average team if you combine batters and pitchers, how many missed calls does the average team have? Somewhere around like 1,500. I'm not going to say every single one of those calls is going to be overturned, but we're pushing to the point where when you're watching a game and you see an egregious mistake and you flip out at your TV, we'll very quickly have those corrected. It's going to be fascinating also to see how teams distribute where the challenges are coming from. You get 3, I believe, over the course of a game, then 1 if it goes to extra innings. And maybe that'll be the pitcher, the catcher, the best hitters. Does the worst hitter get a chance to do it? It's going to be interesting to see how it is eventually adopted by teams.
Yeah, it's going to add a whole nother layer of strategy, it seems, and going to be interesting to see kind of how that changes how teams may value catchers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Catchers are going to have, I think, a lot of say in this. We saw early in spring training that among the sample of calls that were challenged at spring training facilities, catchers were actually the most accurate in getting overturns. So I kind of wonder if you have I'm trying to think, like the Giants have Patrick Bailey, Kyle Raleigh, some of the best catchers in baseball. Teams maybe just say, hey, you can't as the batter challenge. We're going to put it all on the catcher because if their rate of accuracy is better, you want as many calls overturned as you can in a given game. And we'll see which catchers kind of pop in that respect.
Another element to watch for. Now let's talk about the Marlins here because they made some news by announcing that they were going to have a coach start calling pitches instead of the catcher. Just kind of walk us through how this is working, what the process is before we kind of dive into some of the data. What's different about this?
Yeah, it's interesting. So basically what they're doing is they're using a usage model. So this is something that isn't really available publicly, but some teams internally, I think actually most teams internally have one. And it's essentially telling you what pitch to throw and what count based on prior history of that shape, the pitcher's success with that shape, et cetera. So for example, in an 0 count, it might be like, hey, we think your fastball is your best pitch, so throw it, 60 to 70% of the time. But when you go to an 0-2 count, your slider is actually better at generating swing and miss off the plate. So maybe go to that thing 50, 55%. Essentially, these usage models help teams understand what to throw and what counts to make them a better staff overall. Historically, what we've seen is just catchers are the ones that make these calls. And obviously, catchers are in pitching meetings, they're in, advanced prep meetings. They understand what to do. But what I think the Marlins are betting on here is they can have a small efficiency advantage by taking that out of the catcher's hands and not letting him, or Liam Hicks with the Marlins or whoever else across the league have basically almost full autonomy to make certain calls in certain spots. They're playing the edges here and assuming they could get a very small marginal gain that will help out their staff overall. The logistics of it, if you didn't see it over the weekend, essentially, after every pitch, the catcher looks over to the dugout, and an individual named Alon Leichman is the assistant pitching coach who is literally holding up like a sequence of numbers, which the catcher then looks down at his wristband and feeds it to the pitcher. It's a very quick process, obviously, because with no men on base, there's a 15-second pitch clock. And so far, it's been pretty successful for the Marlins. I believe they won all 3 games over the weekend, which is an encouraging sign. And I'm curious to see if they adopt this into next year.
Yeah, the first performance we saw, the first pitcher they did it with Jansen Junk, and you see the pretty good results there.
Yeah, he pitched really well. I think the funniest thing too is if you're thinking about like why are they doing this? Again, it's that marginal edge. But I would say like the guiding force here is to figure out the distribution of fastballs to non-fastballs and make sure that over the course of a game, over the course of a 90 to 100 pitches that a guy like Jansen Junk is throwing, you're on track with it. You're not overthrowing fastballs or overthrowing sliders to the point where, you know, you're starting to get into what you'd call like negative expected value territory for that individual pitcher. It's very data-y, science-y, kind of nerdy overall. And you can see right now the Marlins are the lowest in Major League Baseball in terms of throwing their fastball. So I'm going to classify fastball as a four-seamer or a sinker. I'm going to take cutters out of it specifically. But the Marlins throw the fewest of these kinds of pitches already. And I'm not entirely sure if the model is going to drop this number more, but again, it's a guiding thing to help them in maybe one individual game where Liam Hicks is like, no, I think the fastball is working really well. I kind of feel like this model and Alon calling the pitches is going to be a way for them to kind of check that and make sure they're staying on track with what they believe will give them an edge over the course of the full season.
For a general audience, Lance, why does this matter as far as that pitch mix and those numbers that we're seeing on the screen there?
Yeah, I mean, it matters just from a raw success standpoint. Fastballs allow the most damage. They generate some of the least swing and miss, especially when it's not a very good fastball. We've seen some of the sharper teams in Major League Baseball push away from the fastball. This happened with the Red Sox, the Marlins year over year, specifically in the minors as they brought in Peter Bendix and a variety of new pitching brass, Gabe Kapler, Bill Hiesel as the director of pitching. A lot of sharp minds that are very, very data focused. For the most part, this is what the data says. Now, you do have teams that are zagging against this. In Major League Baseball, I think of teams like the Chicago Cubs, which I cover, the Dodgers, the Tigers are also, or maybe not the Tigers, but we'll say the Dodgers in particular are teams that throw a lot of very good four-seam fastballs. So maybe it's not that they hate four-seam fastballs as a whole. They just know which ones are very good. And for the most part, I think they're kind of admitting a lot of guys on their staff maybe don't have the best four-seam fastballs. And as a result of that, should be throwing pitches, which they expect to gather better results over the course of 162.
So this new way of calling pitches and kind of relying on that a little more, is this something other teams are doing?
It's not, no. I mean, I imagine some teams are looking at how they're calling pitches objectively and then feeding that information back to the catcher, and then maybe the catcher's making subtle adjustments. I very much think this exists in some of the sharper organizations. Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, Red Sox probably are all doing some version of this, but taking it to the extent that the individual, again, Alon Leichman on the sideline, the assistant pitching coach is literally, or in the dugout, literally looking at a piece of paper and referencing like a model alongside this coding system that they're throwing to the catcher. That's very different than what other teams have done. So that last Friday with Jansen Junk throwing was the first time in the pitch comm era, I guess you could call it. So that'd be since 2022 that we saw a team fully take it out of the catcher's hands. There's still an ability for the catcher to shake. There was actually a moment where Calvin Fauché on Saturday shook from, I believe, a slider to a fastball and gave up a home run in the ninth inning to Kyle Gashioka. So, I mean, again, one instance where the model told him to do something and the catcher, or I believe it was the pitcher, again, Fauché, shook it off and had a poor result. I think that's something that they're trying to prevent, right? Again, it's a one instance. I imagine there's going to be times where you shake and then you strike out a guy and you could maybe go to the Marlins front office and be like, hey, if I went to the pitch you said, I would have given up a homer. But it's kind of funny. We saw already the challenge system, or excuse me, not the challenge system, again, bogged down by what we talked about earlier. The ability to call pitches from the dugout has helped the Marlins.
Yeah, you had to imagine the Marlins coaching staff was saying, see, I told you so.
I know.
In that moment. But talk about, you mentioned like the margins and how this is going to help. How does this help a team specifically like the Marlins?
I mean, the Marlins have not had a good pitching staff this year. Unfortunately, they had the underperformance of Sandy Alcantara to start the year. Yuri Perez didn't get back to the midway point in the season. He hasn't been that successful. Jansen Junk is an incredible success story. But overall, I mean, they have almost universally a bottom five pitching staff in baseball. I don't think that's necessarily a byproduct of the people they brought in. A lot of the times when you bring in individuals like this, it's going to take a little bit of time. We saw this with the Astros and the Orioles and a variety of other teams that made pretty wholesale changes in their front office. There's usually like a subtle dip before you have that swing up. So to me, this is something that I think going into next year, I'm pretty fascinated to see the results with, especially as they We'll see if they keep Sandy Alcantara through the offseason, et cetera. But you have a full season of Yuri Perez. Maybe they make a free agent acquisition. They have a couple really good pitchers in the minors and Robbie Snelling and Thomas White, some of their top pitching prospects. I think we'll get major league innings next year. I think this staff could be pretty good next year overall. I had a bold prediction on my YouTube channel earlier this season that they'd have like a top 5 pitching staff in baseball. Yeah, that looks terribly wrong because they're going to be one of the worst. But I have this old saying, never wrong, just early. And I think I'm just a little bit early on the Marlins here. They're making a lot of sharp decisions that I think will eventually pay off.
Do you think, we talked about other teams and how they may be looking at this. Do you think they're kind of looking at how the Marlins are doing with this to see whether they jump in with 2 feet too?
Yeah, exactly. I forgot I didn't answer that question you asked earlier. I think absolutely. This league is a copycat league, right? So if the Marlins have some outside success through the end of the season, I think particularly into next year, I would bet that you probably have another team pick this up. The problem, I think, is going to be with teams with more veteran catchers and veteran pitching coaches. Marlins have an especially young pitching coach in Daniel Moscos, who came from the Cubs, very sharp guy. But I wonder, you think of the team they played, the Rangers, who has Mike Maddox, who's been in the league for forever. You definitely consider him in the old school bucket. If you came to him and presented this idea, I think he'd probably laugh you off out of his office, So you need a convergence of a lot of things in terms of like the catchers, maybe inexperience that can't defend the idea that he can have some edge over the model by reading a hitter's swing, et cetera, et cetera. And I also wonder too, like you got to have probably somewhat of a younger staff, which the Marlins have. I know Sandy's kind of the veteran there, but you need a convergence of factors. And I don't know off the top of my head who'd be maybe the next team to pick it up. Perhaps like the Rays are very advanced team sticking in Florida as well. Maybe they would pick something like this up. They're a very like centralized target team, very analytically driven. They've been analytically driven for a variety of years here. Peter Bendix comes from that regime there in Tampa. So I think that if the Marlins are successful, we'll see another team pick this up next year. As to whether it sweeps the league, I don't think so. I just think there are too many barriers to get over in terms of the catchers and a lot of the more old school minds not stuck in front offices. A lot of these old school coaches are very good and provide a lot of value. I just think you need a convergence of a lot of factors, which the Marlins have, in order to execute this in a way that isn't going to ruffle feathers to the point where you have like a mutiny in an organization.
That's a good point. Still gotta keep people happy there. Lance Brozdowski, player development analyst with the Marquee Sports Network. It's been fun talking about this with you. Really appreciate you joining us here on Florida Live this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And folks, if you haven't seen his YouTube channel, you want to check it out if you're a baseball fan. It's really good stuff. So Lance, we appreciate it.
Thanks a ton. Yeah, check out the YouTube.